He was just a boy until the world made him a monster, Ken Kaneki, a soul torn in two. Before the pain, before the violence, before the transformation, Ken Kaneki was ordinary, a quiet college student who found comfort in books and safety in solitude. He wasn't strong, he wasn't ambitious, he wasn't trying to change the world, he just wanted to live in it peacefully. Kaneki was an introvert, not the kind that hates people, but the kind that fears losing them. So he kept his circle small, avoided conflict, stayed invisible. Because for Kaneki, being unnoticed meant being safe, but that safety was always fragile, because underneath that quiet personality was something else. Fear. Fear of rejection, fear of pain, fear of a world that he didn't understand, and wasn't built to survive. Kaneki doesn't avoid conflict because he's weak, he avoids it because he believes enduring the pain is better than causing it. And then, everything changed. The moment he met Rise, the moment his life stopped being his own. Because in a single night, Kaneki goes from human to something he was never meant to become. And this is where his character truly begins. Because Kaneki's story isn't about becoming strong, it's about being broken over and over and over again, until there's nothing left of who he used to be. Ken Kaneki is more than just the protagonist of Tokyo Ghoul. He is the bridge that holds the entire narrative together. Without Kaneki, Tokyo Ghoul would simply become another story about monsters fighting humans. Another war between two sides convinced of their own righteousness. But Kaneki changes that because he exists between both worlds. He is human, yet forced to become a ghoul. And because of that, the audience experiences the cruelty of both sides through his eyes. At the beginning of the story, Kaneki fears ghouls the same way any normal human would. He sees them as monsters, predators, creatures that exist only to consume and kill, but after the accident with Rise, his reality begins to collapse. For the first time, he's forced to understand what it means to live as the thing he once hated. And that's what makes Kaneki such a powerful narrative device. He isn't simply observing conflict, he is the conflict. Kaneki's existence forces Tokyo Ghoul to ask a terrifying question. What happens when someone no longer belongs anywhere? Humans reject him because he's a ghoul. Ghouls reject him because he was once human. He becomes trapped between two identities, between worlds, between morality itself. And through Kaneki, the audience begins to realize that the true horror of Tokyo Ghoul isn't cannibalistic monsters, it's alienation, it's isolation, it's the unbearable pain of becoming something the world refuses to understand. This is why Kaneki's suffering is so important to the narrative. Every major event in Tokyo Ghoul pushes him further away from certainty. Every tragedy strips away another piece of his innocence. The torture by Yamori, the loss of Antiku, the endless violence surrounding him. All of it slowly transforms Kaneki into someone almost unrecognizable from the quiet college student we first met. But narratively, that transformation is necessary, because Kaneki represents adaptation through suffering. The story constantly forces him into impossible situations where he must either evolve or break, and eventually he does both. What makes Tokyo Ghoul emotionally effective is that Kaneki's transformation never feels triumphant. It feels painful, it feels unnatural, like watching a soul slowly tear itself apart in order to survive. Even when Kaneki becomes stronger, the audience understands that strength came at a terrible cost, and that's why his story resonates with so many people. Because deep down, Tokyo Ghoul isn't really about ghouls, It's about identity. It's about trauma. It's about loneliness. It's about what happens when the world forces someone to become a monster just to keep living. Ken Kaneki is more than just a protagonist of Tokyo Ghoul. He is a symbol of transformation, a representation of what happens when a person is forced to confront parts of themselves they never wanted to acknowledge. At the beginning of the series, Kaneki desperately clings to his identity as a normal human being. He wants a quiet life. He wants comfort. He wants certainty. But life doesn't care about what he wants. Sometimes change arrives suddenly, violently, and without permission. The ghoul inside Kaneki isn't just a biological transformation. It's symbolic. It represents the parts of ourselves we fear the most. The emotions we suppress, the instincts we deny, the darkness we pretend doesn't exist. Throughout the story, Kaneki wages war against himself, not against the CCG, not against our Giri, tree, against himself. He constantly asks the same question, am I human or am I a monster? But Tokyo Ghoul's answer is surprisingly simple. He's both. And so are we. One of the central themes of Tokyo Ghoul is that humanity and monstrosity are not opposites. The series repeatedly shows humans committing horrific acts while ghouls demonstrate compassion, loyalty, and love. The line separating good and evil isn't determined by species, it's determined by choices. This is why Kaneki's struggle resonates with so many people, because his conflict is universal. Most people will never become a ghoul, but everyone experiences some type of suffering. Everyone experiences some type of loss. Everyone experiences moments where they no longer recognize the person staring back at them in the mirror. And like Kaneki, we are forced to decide who we become afterward. Perhaps the most important moment in Kaneki's journey isn't when he defeats Jason. It's when he accepts himself. The white-haired transformation is often remembered as a power-up, but thematically it's much more than that. It's acceptance. For the first time, Kaneki stops running. He stops denying reality. He stops pretending he can return to the person he once was. And in doing so, he becomes stronger, not because he gained power, but because he gained understanding. Tokyo Ghoul ultimately argues that growth is painful, that identity is not fixed, and that becoming who you're meant to be often requires letting go of who you used to be. Kaneki's story is tragic, it's brutal, it's heartbreaking, but it's also hopeful. Because despite everything he loses, despite all the suffering he endures, Kaneki continues moving forward. And perhaps that's why his story continues to resonate years later. Not because he's perfect, not because he's powerful, but because he's human. Even when the world insists that he's a monster. Ken Kaneki is not a story about becoming a ghoul, it's a story about accepting yourself when life changes you into someone you never expected to become. And I'm pretty sure we can all relate to that. As we reach the end of Ken Kaneki's journey, we're left with a question that extends far beyond Tokyo Ghoul itself. What do we do when life changes us? Kaneki's story isn't just about ghouls, violence, or survival. It's about identity, it's about pain, it's about accepting the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. Throughout the series, Kaneki loses friends, family, innocence, and certainty. He suffers more than most protagonists ever will, yet despite everything, he continues moving forward. And perhaps that's why so many people connect with him. Not because he's the strongest character in anime, not because he's the smartest, but because he's human. His fears are our fears, his doubts are our doubts, his search for meaning is our search for meaning. Tokyo Ghoul reminds us that growth is rarely comfortable. Sometimes becoming who we're meant to be requires leaving behind who we used to be. And that is what makes Ken Kaneki one of the most compelling protagonists in modern anime. If you enjoyed this analysis, consider subscribing to the Anime Logician for more deep dives into the psychology, themes, and philosophy behind anime's most memorable characters. Until next time, keep questioning, keep analyzing, and keep searching for the meaning behind the stories we love. Thank you, and goodbye.